open, trying not to make a sound, but it let out a faint creak. The house was steeped in silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I paused, straining to detect any movement or sound. Maybe, just maybe, he'd gone to bed already, and I could sneak to my room unnoticed. The hope flickered briefly before reality set in. As I stepped inside, the soft glow from the living room light spilled into the hallway, cutting through the shadows. He was still awake. A lump formed in my throat, and the weight of my tardiness pressed heavily on me. I was late, much later than I should have been. His rules were clear, and I had disregarded them. But fear wasn't the only thing twisting in my chest. Something unspoken had been brewing between us for weeks. With a deep breath, I forced myself to move forward. Each step felt like an approach to the inevitable. And there he was, seated in his usual chair, his gaze fixed on me. He didn't speak at first. He didn't even move. Just watched me with an expression I couldn't decipher, a mix of disappointment and something more elusive. "Where have you been?" His voice was calm, yet an unmistakable edge made my stomach lurch. I was out with friends," I stammered, trying for nonchalance. The lie felt hollow, and I knew he saw through it. "Of course, he did. You were supposed to be home hours ago." His words were steady, deliberate, as though he was fighting to keep control. The tension in the room was thick, suffocating, and I struggled to find an excuse that didn't sound as weak as I felt. "I lost track of time," I offered, my voice barely above a whisper, my hands fidgeting nervously. His eyes followed the movement, sharp and unyielding. When he stood, I flinched involuntarily. He noticed. The corners of his mouth twitched, but it wasn't a smile. There was no humor in this moment, only the charged silence between us. "Do you think I don't care?" he asked, taking a measured step toward me. His tone was calm, but the weight of his presence was palpable. I dropped my gaze to the floor, unable to meet his eyes, yet I could feel him drawing closer. A cocktail of emotions stirred within me, fear, shame, and something more dangerous. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though even I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for, being late or the thoughts racing through my mind. Thoughts I knew I shouldn't be having. His fingers tilted my chin upward, forcing me to meet his gaze. "Sorry isn't enough," he said, his voice soft but firm. My breath hitched at his touch. It wasn't harsh, yet it carried a weight that made my pulse quicken. This was a line we weren't supposed to cross, and yet neither of us seemed willing to stop. "Does this rephrasing work for your needs, or would you like further refinements?" I eased the door open slowly, hoping it wouldn't betray me, but the soft creak felt deafening in the stillness. The house was cloaked in an eerie quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound cutting through the silence. My heart hammered in my chest, and for a moment, I froze, listening, hoping for no sign of movement. Maybe he had gone to bed. If I was careful, I might just make it to my room unnoticed. The thought was fleeting, replaced by dread as I stepped inside and caught the warm glow of the living room light spilling into the hallway. He was still awake. A knot tightened in my stomach, and the full weight of my mistake bore down on me. I was late, too late. He had been clear about his expectations, and I had failed. But the fear twisting in my gut wasn't the only thing unsettling me. Something had been simmering between us for weeks now, unspoken but impossible to ignore. I took a deep breath and forced myself forward, each step deliberate, as though I were walking into a storm. Then I saw him, seated in his usual chair, his gaze fixed on me like he had been waiting. He didn't speak immediately. He didn't need to. The weight of his silence was enough to pin me in place. His expression was unreadable, a mix of disappointment and something else that made my chest tighten. "Where have you been?" His voice was calm, but the edge was undeniable, sharp enough to cut through the fragile composure I was clinging to. I was out with friends," I stammered, trying to sound casual, but the words rang hollow even to my own ears. He didn't believe me. He didn't have to say it for me to know. "You were supposed to be home hours ago," he said, his tone measured, as if carefully holding back. The tension in the room was palpable, wrapping around me, making it hard to breathe. "I lost track of time," I mumbled, my fingers fidgeting at my sides. The excuse sounded as flimsy as I felt under his gaze. He stood slowly, and I flinched before I could stop myself. He noticed, of course, and for a moment, his lips twitched, though no smile followed. The air between us was charged, a silent storm brewing. "Do you think I don't care where you are? What you're doing?" he asked, his voice low but weighted with something more. He took a step closer, and the heat of his presence seemed to fill the room. I couldn't meet his eyes, staring at the floor instead, but I could feel him, his intensity, his authority, and the unspoken tension that lingered between us. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. For being late. For the thoughts swirling in my mind that I couldn't suppress. He tilted my chin up with his fingers, forcing me to look at him. "Sorry isn't enough," he murmured, and my breath caught. His touch was firm but not harsh, and my body betrayed me, reacting to him in ways I couldn't control. This was dangerous. We both knew it, yet neither of us moved to stop it.